Daniel stands among the most remarkable figures in the Bible, not because he ruled an empire or led an army, but because his faith remained unshaken while kingdoms rose and fell around him. His life unfolds across decades of political upheaval, exile, and divine revelation, revealing a man whose loyalty to God never wavered despite constant pressure to compromise. From a young age, Daniel is distinguished by wisdom, discernment, and spiritual clarity that far exceed natural ability. He becomes known not only for his integrity, but for his God-given capacity to understand mysteries, interpret dreams, and receive visions that unveil the course of history itself. Kings seek his counsel. Empires depend on his insight. Yet Daniel never claims credit for himself. He consistently directs all honor to God as the true source of knowledge and power. What makes Daniel extraordinary is not the absence of danger in his life, but his faithfulness within it. He serves under multiple rulers, survives political conspiracies, and faces threats that carry the weight of death. Still, he remains steadfast in prayer, obedient to God's law, and uncompromising in his devotion. His faith is not reactive or emotional, but disciplined and enduring. Daniel's story bridges two dimensions of Scripture. On one level, it is deeply personal, a testimony of faith lived out in exile. On another, it is profoundly prophetic, revealing divine authority over nations, kings, and the future of the world. Through Daniel, God reveals that history is not random, power is not ultimate, and faithfulness is never wasted. This is the story of a man who lived in foreign courts without losing his identity, who faced earthly power without fearing it, and who trusted God with both his life and the future of all nations. Daniel's story begins in the shadow of catastrophe. In 605 BC, Jerusalem fell under the advancing power of Babylon, led by King Nebuchadnezzar. This invasion marked a decisive turning point for the people of Judah. It was not merely a military defeat, but the beginning of a long and painful exile that would reshape their identity, faith, and future. Babylon's strategy was calculated and deliberate. Rather than destroying everything at once, Nebuchadnezzar initiated a process of domination designed to weaken Judah from within. Sacred objects from the temple were seized and carried to Babylon, symbolizing the humiliation of Jerusalem and the apparent triumph of Babylonian gods over the God of Israel. The heart of the nation's worship was stripped away, leaving behind confusion and despair. Along with the temple treasures, Babylon took people. Young men from royal and noble families were selected and deported to the capital. These captives were not chosen at random. They represented the next generation of leadership, intelligence, and influence. By removing them, Babylon ensured that Judah would be left weakened, while the empire gained promising minds to be reshaped for its own purposes. Daniel was among those taken. Torn from his homeland while still young, he entered a foreign world marked by unfamiliar language, customs, and beliefs. Everything familiar was suddenly gone: family, city, temple, and national security. What remained was uncertainty and the challenge of surviving within a culture determined to redefine him. This moment sets the stage for everything that follows. Daniel's faith would be tested not in isolation, but within the machinery of a dominant empire. The fall of Jerusalem was not the end of God's story, but the environment in which God would reveal his sovereignty in unexpected ways. The young captives brought to Babylon were not treated as ordinary prisoners. Nebuchadnezzar ordered that a specific group be chosen for a distinct purpose. These were youths from noble or royal families, marked by intelligence, physical health, and aptitude for learning. They were selected not for labor, but for transformation. Babylon's plan was sophisticated. The goal was not simply to control these young men, but to reshape them into loyal servants of the empire. To achieve this, they were enrolled in a structured program of education that would last 3 years. During this time, they were taught the language, literature, and wisdom of the Chaldeans. Everything they studied was designed to immerse them fully in Babylonian culture and worldview. This re-education was not neutral. It sought to replace their inherited identity with a new allegiance. By learning Babylon's history, religion, and philosophy, the captives were being subtly detached from the traditions and beliefs of their own people. The empire understood that long-term control required cultural assimilation, not just political dominance. Daniel and his companions were placed at the center of this system. They lived under constant pressure to conform, surrounded by values that stood in direct opposition to their faith. Yet even within this environment, Daniel distinguished himself, not by rebellion, but by quiet resolve. The re-education of Babylon presented Daniel with an early test. Would he allow the empire to redefine who he was, or would he remain faithful to the identity shaped by his God? This tension between assimilation and faithfulness would define the course of his life. As part of Babylon's effort to reshape the young captives, a symbolic but deeply significant step was taken. Their names were changed. This act was not cosmetic. In the ancient world, names carried meaning, identity, and spiritual allegiance. By altering their names, Babylon sought to redefine who these young men were and to whom they belonged. Daniel's name, which honored the God of Israel, was replaced with Belteshazzar, a name associated with Babylonian deities. His companions underwent the same transformation. Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, and Azariah became Abednego. Each new name reflected loyalty to pagan gods, severing linguistic ties to the God they had been raised to serve. This renaming was a calculated attempt to erase spiritual memory. By repeatedly calling them by names rooted in Babylonian religion, the empire reinforced a new identity with every interaction. It was a form of quiet indoctrination, designed to make the captives forget where they came from and who they truly were. Yet while Babylon could change what they were called, it could not change what they believed. Daniel and his friends did not resist the names publicly, but neither did they allow those names to define them. Their loyalty to God remained internal, rooted deeper than language or labels. This moment reveals a crucial truth about Daniel's character. Identity, for him, was not determined by external authority. Even as Babylon attempted to override his faith, Daniel preserved his allegiance in his heart. The name on the record changed, but the man remained the same. Among all the pressures placed on Daniel and his companions, one challenge stood out as both immediate and personal. The king assigned them a daily portion of food and wine from the royal table, a privilege that symbolized acceptance into Babylonian society. To many, this would have seemed like an honor. To Daniel, it presented a spiritual dilemma. The royal provisions were not merely luxurious. They were closely connected to Babylonian religious practices, often associated with offerings made to pagan gods. To consume them would have meant participation, however indirect, in a system that contradicted the laws Daniel had been taught to honor. Daniel recognized that faithfulness was not only tested in dramatic moments, but in daily decisions that shaped character. Rather than reacting defiantly, Daniel approached the situation with wisdom and restraint. He resolved in his heart not to defile himself, yet he did not act with hostility or disrespect. Instead, he spoke to the official assigned to oversee them and requested permission to follow a different diet. His request was modest but firm, grounded in conviction rather than rebellion. Daniel proposed a test. For 10 days, he and his friends would eat only vegetables and drink water. At the end of that period, their appearance could be compared with those who consumed the king's food. If they appeared weaker, the official could act as he saw fit. This decision revealed the depth of Daniel's faith. He trusted that obedience to God would not lead to harm, even in a foreign court. The dietary test became an early demonstration that faithfulness, when guided by wisdom, can stand firm without provoking unnecessary conflict. At the end of the 10-day test, the results were unmistakable. Daniel and his companions appeared healthier and stronger than those who had eaten the food from the king's table. Their faces were clearer, their bodies showed no sign of weakness, and their condition surpassed expectations. What had begun as a quiet act of obedience now stood as visible evidence of God's favor. The official overseeing them took notice. Without argument or resistance, he allowed Daniel and his friends to continue with their chosen diet. What Babylon intended as a privilege was quietly set aside, replaced by a daily pattern of faithfulness that honored God without disrupting order. Yet the outcome extended far beyond physical appearance. God granted Daniel and his companions knowledge, understanding, and skill in every kind of learning. Their wisdom was not merely academic. It carried discernment, clarity, and depth that set them apart from others undergoing the same training. Daniel, in particular, received insight into visions and dreams, an ability that would later shape the course of empires. When the time of training ended and the young men were brought before King Nebuchadnezzar, the difference became undeniable. Among all those examined, none were found equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. In every matter of wisdom and understanding, the king discovered them to be 10 times better than the magicians and enchanters throughout his kingdom. This moment confirmed a central truth of Daniel's story. Faithfulness to God did not hinder success, it elevated it. Obedience did not diminish influence, it multiplied it. The superiority displayed was not the result of Babylonian education alone, but the outcome of divine favor resting on lives committed to God. Not long after Daniel and his companions entered royal service, a crisis shook the court of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar was troubled by a dream that left him restless and disturbed. Unlike ordinary dreams, this one carried a weight that lingered, filling the king with anxiety he could not ignore. Yet when he awoke, the details escaped him, leaving behind only the certainty that the dream mattered. Desperate for answers, the king summoned the wise men of Babylon, magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers, demanding not only an interpretation, but the dream itself. His command was unprecedented. Normally, wise men were told the dream and asked to explain it. This time, Nebuchadnezzar refused to reveal anything. He insisted that if they truly possessed supernatural insight, they would be able to tell him what he had dreamed. The wise men protested. They argued that no human could meet such a demand and that only the gods, who did not dwell among mortals, could reveal such secrets. Their response only deepened the king's fury. To Nebuchadnezzar, their inability exposed deception rather than limitation. Enraged, the king issued a sweeping decree. All the wise men of Babylon were to be executed. The order did not distinguish between the guilty and the innocent. Daniel and his companions, though not present at the initial confrontation, were included among those marked for death. In a single moment, Daniel's faithfulness was tested at the highest level. The favor he had gained now placed him in direct danger. The situation was humanly impossible, and time was running out. What followed would reveal whether Babylon's power or God's wisdom would prevail. When Daniel learned of the king's decree, he did not respond with panic or defiance. Instead, he acted with wisdom and composure. He approached Arioch, the commander responsible for carrying out the executions, and asked for clarity. After learning the reason behind the sentence, Daniel requested time from the king, confident that an answer could be given. Once permission was granted, Daniel returned to his companions, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and explained the gravity of the situation. Their lives, along with the lives of many others, hung in the balance. Together, they turned to God, seeking mercy from the God of heaven concerning the mystery of the dream. Their response was united and urgent, rooted in the understanding that human wisdom could not solve what lay before them. That night, God answered. The mystery of the king's dream was revealed to Daniel in a vision. What had been hidden from the wisest minds of Babylon was unveiled through divine revelation. Daniel did not treat this moment lightly or rush forward in pride. Before approaching the king, he paused to give thanks. Daniel praised God openly, acknowledging that wisdom and power belonged to him alone. He declared that God changes times and seasons, removes kings and establishes them, and reveals deep and hidden things. Daniel recognized that the revelation was not given because of his own insight, but because God desired to make his purposes known. This moment marked a turning point. Prayer had led to revelation, and revelation would soon lead to deliverance. The power that Babylon claimed through magic and divination was exposed as empty, while the authority of the God of Israel was made unmistakably clear. Before Daniel took a single step toward the king, he turned fully toward God in praise. The revelation of the dream did not lead him to self-confidence or urgency, but to worship. Daniel understood that what had been revealed was not a product of intelligence or strategy, but a gift granted by divine mercy. Daniel's prayer of praise acknowledged God as the true source of wisdom and power. He declared that God alone governs time and history, establishing kingdoms and removing rulers according to his will. What appeared unpredictable or chaotic to human eyes was, in reality, under divine control. Kings rose and fell not by chance, but by God's authority. He praised God for revealing what was hidden, for bringing light into places of mystery and darkness. Daniel recognized that human wisdom reaches its limit quickly, but God's understanding has no boundary. What the wise men of Babylon could not uncover through magic or divination, God revealed freely to those who sought him in humility. Daniel also expressed gratitude for answered prayer. He acknowledged that God had listened to the pleas offered in desperation and had responded with clarity and truth. The revelation was not merely information, it was deliverance, protection, and proof of God's faithfulness. This moment of praise anchored everything that followed. Daniel's response reminds us that true revelation should always lead to worship. Before standing before earthly power, Daniel bowed before divine authority, recognizing that the God who reveals mysteries is also the God who rules all things. When Daniel stood before King Nebuchadnezzar, he made one thing clear before giving any interpretation: the wisdom about to be revealed did not originate with him. He stated openly that no wise man, enchanter, magician, or astrologer could explain the mystery the king sought to understand. What the king desired to know could only be revealed by the God of heaven. Daniel then described the dream exactly as Nebuchadnezzar had seen it. The king had beheld a great and dazzling statue, immense in size and terrifying in appearance. Its head was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet a mixture of iron and clay. As the king watched, a stone was cut out without human hands and struck the statue at its feet. The impact shattered the entire figure, reducing gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay into dust that the wind carried away without a trace. The stone, however, did not vanish. It grew into a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Daniel explained the meaning with precision and authority. The head of gold represented Nebuchadnezzar's own kingdom, Babylon, granted power, glory, and dominion by God himself. After Babylon would come another kingdom, inferior in splendor, symbolized by silver. A third kingdom of bronze would follow, ruling over the earth. Then a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, would crush and break all others, yet it would eventually be divided, represented by feet mixed with iron and clay, strong yet unstable. Finally, Daniel declared the ultimate truth of the vision. In the days of those kings, God would establish a kingdom that would never be destroyed. This kingdom would not be left to another people. It would crush all human kingdoms and stand forever. The stone not cut by human hands represented a divine kingdom, eternal and unshakable. The dream revealed that history moves according to God's design, not human ambition. When Daniel finished explaining both the dream and its meaning, the court fell silent. King Nebuchadnezzar recognized immediately that what he had heard could not have come from human insight alone. The accuracy of the dream's description and the authority of its interpretation confirmed that Daniel's God had revealed what no one else could. In a striking display of humility, the king fell before Daniel and paid him honor. He acknowledged openly that Daniel's God was supreme over all gods, the Lord of kings, and the revealer of mysteries. Though Nebuchadnezzar did not abandon his own beliefs entirely, this moment marked a powerful recognition of divine authority that surpassed Babylon's religion and wisdom. The king then elevated Daniel to a position of great responsibility. Daniel was given gifts, authority, and a high-ranking role within the administration of the empire. He was appointed ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed in charge of all the wise men of the kingdom. What had begun as a death sentence ended in promotion. Daniel did not forget his companions. He requested that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah also be appointed to positions of authority. The king granted the request, placing them over the affairs of the province while Daniel remained in the royal court. This act reflected Daniel's loyalty and gratitude, ensuring that those who had prayed with him now shared in the outcome. This moment demonstrated a recurring pattern in Daniel's life. Faithfulness in crisis led to influence, not for personal glory, but to position God's servants where they could bear witness. God's wisdom had not only saved lives, it had reshaped the leadership of an empire. Not long after Daniel's promotion, King Nebuchadnezzar commissioned a monument that would test loyalty throughout his empire. He ordered the construction of a massive golden image, set up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Towering and unmistakable, the statue was designed to inspire awe, fear, and absolute obedience. A royal proclamation followed. Officials from every level of government were summoned: satraps, prefects, governors, counselors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and representatives from every province. When the sound of music filled the air, the command was clear and uncompromising: everyone was to fall down and worship the golden image. Failure to comply would result in immediate execution, carried out by being thrown into a blazing furnace. The decree left no room for neutrality. Worship was not presented as a private matter of belief, but as a public act of allegiance. To bow before the image was to affirm loyalty to the king's authority and the gods he honored. Refusal was framed as rebellion. Daniel's three companions, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, found themselves at the center of this demand. Though Daniel is not mentioned at this moment, The spotlight falls on these three men who now faced a choice with life or death consequences. Compliance would secure their positions and preserve their lives. Resistance would almost certainly mean death. The golden image revealed the limits of Nebuchadnezzar's earlier humility. Though he had acknowledged Daniel's God, he now sought worship for a symbol that represented his own power and control. The stage was set for a confrontation that would once again reveal the difference between human authority and divine sovereignty. When the music sounded across the plain of Dura, the crowd moved as one. Officials, soldiers, and leaders fell to the ground in obedience to the king's command. Yet among the mass of bowed figures, three men remained standing. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not move. Their refusal did not go unnoticed. Certain officials quickly reported them to King Nebuchadnezzar, accusing them of defying his decree. They emphasized the seriousness of the offense, reminding the king that these were men he himself had promoted. Their loyalty, the accusers claimed, had been betrayed. Furious, Nebuchadnezzar summoned the three men and demanded an explanation. He offered them one final chance. If they would bow when the music sounded again, their lives would be spared. If not, they would be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then the king issued a challenge that revealed his pride. He asked what god could possibly rescue them from his hand. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered with calm conviction. They declared that their God was able to deliver them from the furnace and from the king's power. But they went further. Even if God chose not to rescue them, they would still refuse to worship the golden image. Their obedience was not conditional on survival. Enraged, Nebuchadnezzar ordered the furnace heated far beyond its normal intensity. The flames became so fierce that the soldiers who carried the three men were killed by the heat. Bound and helpless, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown into the fire. Then the impossible happened. Nebuchadnezzar looked into the furnace and was stunned. Instead of three men bound by flames, he saw four men walking freely in the fire, unharmed. The fourth figure appeared unlike any human, and the king recognized that divine power had entered the flames. The fire that was meant to destroy had become a place of deliverance. Amazed and shaken, King Nebuchadnezzar rushed to the opening of the furnace and called out to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He addressed them not as criminals, but as servants of the Most High God, urging them to come out. When they emerged from the fire, the impossible became undeniable. The officials gathered around them in disbelief. Their bodies were unharmed. Their clothes showed no signs of burning. Even the smell of smoke was absent. The flames that had consumed soldiers moments earlier had no power over them. What was meant to be an execution had become a public demonstration of divine authority. Nebuchadnezzar spoke before all who had witnessed the event and declared praise for the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He acknowledged that God had sent his messenger and delivered his servants because they trusted him. The king recognized that they had chosen obedience over survival, refusing to worship any god except their own. Moved by what he had seen, Nebuchadnezzar issued a decree throughout his empire. He warned that anyone who spoke against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would face severe punishment. No other god, he proclaimed, could rescue in this way. The king then promoted the three men, granting them greater authority within the province of Babylon. Their faithfulness, once again, had not diminished their influence but expanded it. Though Nebuchadnezzar's understanding of God was still incomplete, this moment marked another step in his recognition of divine supremacy. The miracle in the furnace had transformed defiance into testimony and turned public execution into public worship. Sometime after the events on the plain of Dura, King Nebuchadnezzar experienced another dream, one that carried a very different tone from the first. Unlike the earlier vision that disturbed him in fragments, this dream was vivid and complete, and its meaning lingered with unsettling clarity. In the dream, the king saw an enormous tree at the center of the earth. It grew tall and strong, rising until its top reached the heavens and becoming visible to the ends of the world. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and it provided food for all. Animals found shelter beneath its branches, birds nested in its limbs, and every living creature was sustained by it. The image portrayed prosperity, dominance, and life flowing outward from a single source. Then the dream shifted. A holy watcher descended from heaven and issued a command that shattered the scene of abundance. The tree was to be cut down. Its branches were to be stripped, its leaves scattered, and its fruit dispersed. The animals were to flee, and the birds were to abandon its branches. Only the stump was to remain, bound with iron and bronze, left among the grass of the field. The decree did not end with destruction alone. The watcher declared that the mind of the one represented by the tree would be changed from that of a man to that of an animal, and that 7 periods of time would pass over him. The purpose of the judgment was made explicit, to demonstrate that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men and gives them to whom he wills. Troubled by the dream, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Daniel once more, seeking understanding. The vision was clear, but its implications were heavy. What Daniel would soon explain carried both warning and mercy, revealing that even judgment was meant to lead to humility and restoration. When Daniel heard the dream, he was deeply troubled. He understood its meaning immediately, yet he hesitated to speak. The message was severe, and its consequences would fall directly on the king. Still, Daniel spoke with honesty and respect, explaining that the great tree represented Nebuchadnezzar himself, his power, influence, and dominion over the earth. Daniel revealed that the decree of the Holy Watcher was a judgment from the Most High. Because of the king's pride, he would be driven away from human society and would live like an animal, dwelling among the fields, eating grass, and being exposed to the elements. This condition would last until Nebuchadnezzar acknowledged that authority over kingdoms belongs to God alone. Yet even within the judgment, mercy was present. Daniel pointed to the preserved stump as a sign of hope. The kingdom would not be taken permanently. Restoration would come after the king learned humility. Daniel urged Nebuchadnezzar to repent, to break away from injustice, and to show mercy to the oppressed, hoping the judgment might be delayed or softened. For a time, the warning seemed unheeded. 12 months later, as Nebuchadnezzar walked on the roof of his royal palace, he spoke proudly of Babylon's greatness, attributing its glory entirely to his own power. In that moment, the decree was fulfilled. The king lost his reason and was driven from human society. Nebuchadnezzar lived like a beast of the field until the appointed time had passed. Then, at last, he lifted his eyes toward heaven. His understanding returned, and he praised the Most High. His kingdom was restored, along with greater honor than before. Through humiliation came transformation, and through humility came restoration. Years later, a new ruler sat on Babylon's throne, and the atmosphere of the empire had changed. Belshazzar, reigning during Babylon's final days, hosted a lavish feast for 1,000 of his nobles. The city believed itself secure. Its massive walls and fortified gates fostered confidence, even as enemy forces gathered beyond them. In a display of arrogance, Belshazzar ordered that the sacred vessels taken from the temple in Jerusalem be brought into the banquet hall. These were the same objects once set apart for worship of the God of Israel. Now they were filled with wine and passed among the king, his officials, his wives, and his concubines. As they drank, they praised gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, objects that could neither see nor hear. In that moment of open desecration, the atmosphere shifted. Without warning, fingers of a human hand appeared and began writing on the plaster of the palace wall, illuminated by the light of the lampstand. The room fell silent. Belshazzar watched in terror as the message was written. His confidence collapsed instantly. His face turned pale, his thoughts overwhelmed him, and his knees began to shake uncontrollably. The king summoned his wise men in desperation, offering rich rewards to anyone who could read the writing and explain its meaning. Yet once again, Babylon's wisdom failed. No one could interpret the message. The symbols on the wall remained a mystery, hanging like a sentence suspended in time. The feast that began in arrogance ended in fear. Babylon's defenses had not protected it from judgment. The moment revealed that no wall, celebration, or power could shield a kingdom that mocked what was holy. As confusion filled the banquet hall, the Queen Mother entered and addressed King Belshazzar. She reminded him of a man in the kingdom who possessed the spirit of the holy God, a man known for insight, wisdom, and the ability to interpret mysteries. She spoke of Daniel, who had served under Nebuchadnezzar and had proven himself trustworthy when no one else could provide answers. Daniel was summoned and brought before the king. Belshazzar promised him rewards of purple robes, a gold chain, and high rank if he could read the writing and explain its meaning. Daniel declined the gifts, making it clear that his interpretation would not be influenced by reward. He then addressed the king with unwavering honesty. Daniel reminded Belshazzar of Nebuchadnezzar's history, how God had granted him power and how pride had led to his humiliation until he acknowledged God's sovereignty. Belshazzar, Daniel said, knew all of this, yet chose arrogance instead of humility. He had exalted himself against the Lord of heaven, defiled sacred vessels, and praised lifeless idols. Then Daniel read the words written on the wall, Min, Tekel, Parsin. He explained their meaning clearly. Min declared that God had numbered Belshazzar's days and brought them to an end. Tekel revealed that the king had been weighed on the scales and found lacking. Parsin announced that the kingdom would be divided and given to the Medes and Persians. The message was final. There was no call to repentance, no delay of judgment. That very night, Belshazzar was killed, and Babylon fell to its enemies. The words written on the wall were not a warning, they were a verdict. With the fall of Babylon, power shifted abruptly into new hands. The empire that had dominated the region for generations collapsed in a single night, and control passed to the Medes and Persians. Darius the Mede assumed authority over the kingdom, inheriting a vast territory that now required order, stability, and administration. Unlike previous rulers, Darius moved quickly to organize his domain. He established a system of satraps, appointing officials to govern various regions and ensure that royal interests were protected. Over these administrators, Darius set 3 high officials to supervise the entire system and prevent corruption. Daniel was chosen as one of them. Daniel's selection was not accidental. By this time, he was an experienced statesman who had served faithfully under multiple kings. His reputation for integrity, wisdom, and reliability set him apart. Darius soon recognized something exceptional in Daniel and planned to elevate him above all other officials, placing the entire kingdom under his supervision. This decision created immediate tension. The other administrators and satraps resented Daniel's favor and sought a way to undermine him. They examined his conduct closely, hoping to find corruption, negligence, or disloyalty. Yet their efforts failed. Daniel's character was beyond reproach. No accusation could be sustained against him. Frustrated, his rivals realized that the only way to trap Daniel was through his devotion to God. His faith, which had sustained him through the rise and fall of empires, now became the focus of a new conspiracy. What followed would test Daniel's loyalty once again and reveal the cost of unwavering faithfulness. Unable to find fault in Daniel's conduct, the officials who opposed him devised a plan rooted in deception. They approached King Darius with a proposal designed to appeal to royal pride. For 30 days, they suggested, no one should pray to any god or human being except the king himself. Anyone who violated this decree would be thrown into a den of lions. Unaware of their true intentions, Darius approved the law and sealed it according to the unchangeable statutes of the Medes and Persians. Daniel learned of the decree, yet his response revealed where his loyalty truly lay. He did not alter his habits or attempt to hide his faith. Instead, he went to his home, opened the windows facing Jerusalem, and prayed as he had always done, 3 times a day, giving thanks to God. His obedience was steady, not defiant. Faithfulness was simply who he was. Daniel's rivals wasted no time. They found him praying and immediately reported him to the king. When Darius realized that Daniel was the one accused, he was deeply distressed. He tried repeatedly to find a way to save him, but the law could not be revoked. As evening approached, the king had no choice but to carry out the sentence. Daniel was lowered into the den, and a stone was placed over the opening. Darius sealed it with his own signet ring, ensuring that nothing could be changed. Yet even as he did so, the king spoke words filled with hope. He expressed confidence that Daniel's God would deliver him. That night, Darius could not sleep. At dawn, he rushed to the den and called out anxiously. Daniel answered, unharmed. God had sent an angel to shut the lions' mouths. Faithfulness once again triumphed over fear, and God's power was made visible before all. After Daniel was lifted safely from the lion's den, the reality of what had occurred could not be ignored. The God Daniel served had intervened openly and decisively. King Darius, who had spent the night in anguish, now stood as a witness to divine deliverance. Darius ordered that those who had maliciously accused Daniel be brought forward. They, along with their families, were thrown into the same den of lions. Before they reached the floor, the lions overpowered them, confirming that Daniel's survival had not been a matter of chance or circumstance. The difference lay not in the animals, but in God's protection. Moved by what he had seen, Darius issued a decree to all peoples, nations, and languages throughout his kingdom. He proclaimed that everyone should fear and reverence the God of Daniel. Unlike the lifeless idols of Babylon, this God was living and enduring forever. His kingdom would never be destroyed, and his dominion would have no end. The king declared that God delivers and rescues, performing signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He acknowledged openly that this God had saved Daniel from the power of the lions. The decree transformed a personal miracle into a public testimony, spreading the knowledge of God's power across the empire. Daniel continued to prosper during the reign of Darius and into the reign of Cyrus the Persian. His faithfulness had once again resulted in influence, not for his own elevation, but for the acknowledgement of God's sovereignty before nations and rulers alike. At this point in Daniel's story, the focus shifts. The narrative moves away from public events in royal courts and toward revelations given directly to Daniel himself. What follows is no longer primarily historical description, but prophetic insight. These visions unveil realities that extend beyond Daniel's lifetime, reaching into the unfolding course of world history. Unlike the earlier dreams interpreted for kings, these visions were granted privately to Daniel. They came through symbols, imagery, and heavenly messengers, often leaving Daniel overwhelmed and troubled. The messages were not meant to entertain or impress. They were meant to reveal God's sovereign control over nations and the ultimate outcome of human power. Daniel lived under multiple empires, witnessing their rise and collapse. Through these visions, God showed him that earthly kingdoms, no matter how strong they appear, are temporary. Behind political events stands divine authority directing history toward a predetermined end. The visions also introduced themes of conflict, judgment, and hope. They revealed a world shaped by spiritual forces as well as human ambition. While some details were difficult to understand fully, the overarching message was clear: God reigns above every kingdom, and his purposes will prevail. For Daniel, these revelations carried a personal cost. The weight of what he saw left him physically weakened and emotionally burdened. Yet he remained faithful in recording what was revealed, even when the meaning was not immediately clear. This transition marks a deepening of Daniel's role, not only as a faithful servant in exile, but as a prophet entrusted with truths that would encourage future generations to remain steadfast in faith, even in times of persecution and uncertainty. In one of his visions, Daniel saw a scene that was both unsettling and symbolic. For great beasts emerged from a turbulent sea, each one different from the others. The restless waters represented chaos and unrest among the nations, setting the stage for a revelation about the rise and fall of world powers. The first beast appeared like a lion with the wings of an eagle. As Daniel watched, its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground and made to stand like a man, with a human mind given to it. This image represented a mighty kingdom that would experience both dominance and humbling, reflecting the transformation of power through divine intervention. The second beast resembled a bear raised up on one side, with 3 ribs clenched between its teeth. It was commanded to rise and devour much flesh. This figure symbolized a kingdom marked by imbalance and aggression, expanding through conquest and force. The third beast was like a leopard with 4 wings on its back and 4 heads. It moved with speed and authority, representing a kingdom that would spread rapidly across vast territories and later be divided into multiple parts. The fourth beast was unlike any other. Terrifying and powerful, it had iron teeth and crushed everything in its path. It devoured, trampled, and shattered what remained. This kingdom stood apart in its brutality and strength. From it emerged 10 horns, and among them rose a smaller horn that uprooted others and spoke with arrogance, setting itself against God. As Daniel considered these beasts, his attention was drawn away from earthly chaos toward a heavenly courtroom. Thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat, clothed in purity and glory. The vision revealed that despite the terror of earthly powers, judgment belongs to God, and every kingdom is ultimately subject to his authority. As Daniel's vision continued, the focus shifted decisively from the chaos of the beasts to the certainty of divine rule. After witnessing the judgment of the oppressive powers, Daniel saw a figure whose arrival marked a complete reversal of everything the beasts represented. He saw one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. This figure approached the Ancient of Days and was presented before him, not as a threat or rival, but as one granted authority. Unlike the beasts that rose from the sea through violence and domination, the Son of Man came from heaven, carrying legitimacy that did not originate from human ambition. To this figure was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom. His authority was not temporary or fragile. It would never pass away. His kingdom would not be destroyed, replaced, or divided. Where previous empires rose and fell, this reign would endure forever. Power was no longer seized, it was bestowed. Daniel understood that this vision revealed the ultimate answer to the terror of earthly kingdoms. Human empires may appear unstoppable, but they are limited in time and scope. The Son of Man represented a righteous rule that would outlast every system built on force, fear, or pride. The vision also carried hope for God's people. The kingdom given to the Son of Man would be shared with the saints, those who remained faithful through oppression and trial. Their suffering would not be forgotten, and their endurance would be rewarded with participation in an eternal reign. This moment stood at the center of Daniel's prophetic revelation. It affirmed that history moves toward justice, not chaos, and that God's final kingdom would be governed not by beasts, but by righteousness. In another vision, Daniel was shown a scene that clarified the rise and fall of specific empires with striking precision. This time, the imagery shifted from beasts emerging from the sea to animals seen on land, emphasizing historical detail rather than broad symbolism. Daniel saw a ram standing beside a river, possessing 2 horns. One horn was higher than the other, though it grew later. The ram charged westward, northward, and southward, and no animal could stand against it. It did as it pleased and became powerful. The vision revealed a kingdom marked by dominance and expansion, yet characterized by internal imbalance. Suddenly, a male goat appeared from the west, moving so swiftly that it scarcely touched the ground. Between its eyes was a prominent horn. With fierce anger, the goat struck the ram, shattered its horns, and trampled it with unstoppable force. The ram had no power to resist. The roles of dominance had reversed in an instant. As the goat grew exceedingly powerful, its great horn was suddenly broken. In its place, 4 notable horns rose toward the 4 winds of heaven. The speed and fragmentation of power revealed a kingdom that expanded rapidly, then divided after reaching its height. From one of those divisions came a smaller horn that grew exceedingly strong, extending its influence toward the south, the east, and the beautiful land. This power exalted itself, challenged what was holy, disrupted worship, and cast truth to the ground. Its actions revealed arrogance and hostility toward God. The vision disturbed Daniel deeply. He sought understanding and was told that these events concerned the appointed time of the end. The message revealed that God had already measured the rise of empires and the limits of their power. Though the vision was heavy, it affirmed once again that history unfolds under divine authority, not human chance. While studying the writings of the prophet Jeremiah, Daniel came to understand that the period of Jerusalem's desolation was nearing its appointed end. Jeremiah had spoken of 70 years of exile, and Daniel realized that this timeline was not random. It was set by God. This understanding did not lead Daniel to passive expectation, but to urgent prayer. Daniel turned to God with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes, offering a prayer marked by humility and confession. He did not excuse the sins of Israel or distance himself from them. Instead, he acknowledged the nation's rebellion, disobedience, and failure to listen to God's prophets. Daniel recognized that the exile was not an accident of history, but the result of covenant unfaithfulness. As Daniel prayed, confessing sin and appealing to God's mercy, a divine response was given. The angel Gabriel came to him with insight and understanding, revealing a timeline far greater than Daniel had anticipated. God was not only addressing the end of exile, but the unfolding of redemption itself. Daniel was told that 70 weeks had been decreed for his people and for the holy city. These periods were appointed to bring an end to transgression, to seal up sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring everlasting righteousness, to confirm vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. The message pointed beyond immediate restoration to a future work of salvation. The prophecy outlined a sequence of events beginning with the decree to rebuild Jerusalem and leading to the coming of the Anointed One. It spoke of interruption, suffering, and ultimate fulfillment. Though complex and weighty, the message affirmed that history moves according to God's redemptive plan, and that even suffering serves a purpose within His sovereign design. In the later years of his life, Daniel received revelations that went beyond earthly kingdoms and exposed the unseen conflict shaping human history. These final visions were given during a period of mourning and fasting, as Daniel sought understanding about what lay ahead for his people. What he encountered revealed that events on earth are deeply connected to realities in the spiritual realm. Daniel was visited by a heavenly messenger whose appearance was overwhelming, clothed in radiant garments, with a face like lightning and eyes like flaming fire. The vision drained Daniel of his strength, leaving him trembling and powerless. The messenger explained that his arrival had been delayed by opposition from spiritual forces, specifically the prince of the kingdom of Persia, until Michael, one of the chief princes, came to assist. This revelation unveiled a truth Daniel had not previously seen so clearly: behind political power struggles exist spiritual battles. Nations rise and fall not only through human decision, but within a larger conflict that unfolds beyond human sight. God's purposes move forward despite resistance, carried out through His heavenly agents. The visions that followed traced the future with remarkable detail. Daniel was shown conflicts between kingdoms, betrayals, wars, and periods of great suffering for God's people. He saw rulers who would exalt themselves, persecute the faithful, and defy God openly. Yet he was also shown the limits of their power. Their time was fixed, their authority temporary. The revelation culminated in a promise of deliverance. Michael would arise to protect God's people. A time of unprecedented distress would occur, and many who sleep in the dust of the earth would awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and contempt. The vision affirmed resurrection, judgment, and eternal reward. Though much of what Daniel saw was sealed for a future generation, the message was clear: God remains sovereign over history, and faithfulness will ultimately be vindicated. As the revelations came to an end, Daniel remained deeply affected by what he had seen and heard. The visions stretched far beyond his lifetime, revealing events he would not witness and outcomes he would not fully understand. The weight of these revelations left him weary, yet they also anchored him in hope. Daniel was told that many of the words he had received were to be sealed until the time of the end. This instruction did not diminish their importance. Instead, it affirmed that God's plan unfolds according to appointed times. What was unclear to Daniel would one day be understood by future generations living within those moments of fulfillment. Despite the complexity of the visions, the message Daniel received at the end was deeply personal. He was instructed to go his way and continue faithfully in the life God had given him. The future of nations, the rise of kingdoms, and the culmination of history rested in God's hands, not Daniel's. His responsibility was not to control outcomes, but to remain faithful until the end. Daniel was given a promise that reached beyond death itself. He was assured that he would rest and then rise again to receive his allotted inheritance at the end of days. This assurance confirmed that faithfulness is never temporary in God's economy. What is entrusted to God is preserved beyond a single lifetime. Daniel's life stands as a witness to what unwavering faith looks like when tested across an entire lifetime. From youth to old age, through changing empires and shifting political powers, Daniel remained anchored to God. He did not know comfort without challenge, nor influence without risk. Yet in every season, his loyalty never bent. What sets Daniel apart is not that he avoided danger, but that he trusted God within it. He prayed when prayer was forbidden. He spoke truth when silence would have been safer. He remained faithful when compromise would have been rewarded. His obedience was not shaped by circumstances, but by conviction. Daniel's story speaks directly to every generation that feels pressure to conform, to remain silent, or to dilute faith in order to survive. His life declares that faithfulness is possible even in hostile environments, and that integrity can endure when rooted in trust in God. The God who sustained Daniel remains the same today, sovereign over nations, attentive to prayer, and faithful to those who honor him. This story invites reflection. Where are we tempted to compromise? Where does fear challenge obedience? Daniel reminds us that history does not belong to the powerful, but to God. Kingdoms rise and fall, but faithfulness leaves an eternal mark. The book of Daniel closes with hope, not uncertainty. It assures us that obedience is never wasted, suffering is never unseen, and faith will ultimately be rewarded. Like Daniel, we are called to live with conviction, to trust God with outcomes, and to remain faithful, no matter the cost.